You know, the remark that you said at the beginning, it's an amazing place for us to be talking about this issue. It really resonated for me. I haven't been here before, and I feel like it's a very, very powerful place to be talking about LGBT rights in general, and also to talk about the rights of people who have to flee their countries of origin because of persecution. So it's really terrific to be here. So you introduced the organization a little bit. Basically, ORAM is an organization that focuses on increasing protection mostly for LGBTI refugees, people who are fleeing persecution based on their sexual orientation and gender identity. And we do that through legal representation. So there's a mention of the work that we do in Turkey, representing mostly Iranian refugees who fled from there. We do education, sort of educate NGOs, educate UNHCR, and others, and then we engage in advocacy and sort of try to develop partnerships with organizations around the world that are very much focused on this issue. One of the things that we noticed while we were engaged in this work is that there really aren't a huge number of refugees that come forward and make their claims on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. There's been a lot of discussion about it in the last couple of years, which is very heartening and interesting, but there's a sort of clamoring for the thousands of people that are coming forth from the 76 countries around the world that criminalize consensual same-sex conduct. But we were finding that we didn't know where they were. And so one of the things that we wanted to look at was to what extent do environments in the frontline agencies that assist these refugees, to what extent do those environments welcome people to come forward and say, right, this is the basis of my claim. I'm a gay man, I'm a lesbian, I'm trans, I'm bi, I'm intersex, and this is why I had to run away from home. And so what we wanted to do, this is what I'm going to talk about today, is a survey that we've done internationally of organizations that work with refugees to find out some attitudes about LGBTI refugees, and look to see if we could find out any information there that would inform some of the advocacy work that we might do, some of the partnerships that we could develop, and some of the training that could be done out there in the field to try to address this issue. Anecdotally, we certainly have heard from refugees about the problem of not getting treated with equality from service providers, and that actually came out in the last talk a little bit with some of the sex worker quotes. So we did some research on LGBTI refugees in Turkey, mostly Iranian, and I'll just read you a quote from one who said, "We were referred to a local charity which runs a soup kitchen, but when they found out that we were gay, they refused to give us any food. Since we were wearing makeup and our hair was long, all the local people receiving food there laughed at us. I cut off my hair because of this, and I went back to the charity, but they still refused to serve us. We were told that we were not clean and that they could not give us any food because they could not touch us. We're just asking for our rights, nothing more. We just want to be treated like human beings, not like animals." So this is something that had come up again and again with the clients that we were working with in Turkey, and we had a sense that this was something that probably was being experienced by other people in other parts of the world. So together with the sociology department at Indiana University, which has the Kinsey Institute, if that means something for people here, we decided to develop a survey, and I'll just tell you a little bit about how we developed it and then get into some of the preliminary findings. Basically what we did was we got a humongous list of organizations that work with UNHCR around the world, and then did a bunch more research to get more names. And we wound up getting close to 1,500 organizations on this list. So if you're a researcher interested in surveying refugee NGOs, please come and find me, because I want to be able to share this excellent resource. And we developed a survey instrument that went through gazillions of versions, because the initial version felt like it was from the 1950s, and I was kind of shocked when I first saw it, so we had to work on concepts there. And then sent it out. It's an internet-based survey, which we were very concerned about getting kind of no response at all. We sent it out to this list of organizations, and sort of some of them disqualified themselves and so on. At the time that the data that's used for this presentation was gathered, there were 224 that had good responses. So I should just note here that this is sort of our preliminary findings. We still have responses that are coming in until July 15th, and we'll probably have around a 35% response rate, which is considered pretty good for something like this. It doesn't account for all the people who didn't answer and why they didn't answer the survey. but it's still a fairly respectable response rate. What we got out of it also was that as of May 1st, 100 of the organizations that were asked questions about what they think about LGBTI individuals, how willing they are to serve LGBTI refugees and so on, was that they said, please interview me, I want to talk more about this, which was very exciting. So we're going to be following up with those folks. So that was sort of the methodology, got it out there, got it translated, sent it out, and the research here is based on the responses from 275 individuals. So basically they're from many places in the world. The purple is the places where people responded. You can see Asia's a little bit weak, and so we have to do some follow-up and hopefully get a little bit more response from them there. And one of the questions that we wanted to look at first, just as a baseline question, was, do you have a set of ethical codes? Do you have a code of conduct in your organization? And if you do, does it include sexual orientation or gender identity? Does it list it there? Which to us was sort of an indicator that people were at all interested in this issue, and that the question of discrimination on sexual minorities had even entered the discussion. So there was some regional variation here. You see this sort of the longest bars from North America, the shortest bars from the Africa region, but still you're at 55%. So that was an interesting bit of information for us. The core of this survey, though, was whether the respondents believed that LGBTI refugees deserved protection under the Refugee Convention, under the local law. And then there was also a question about whether people were willing to provide that protection. And the response rates were remarkably high. And we were wondering why that was, because it was not, I don't know, it was not the response that we expected, and it was surprising. And I don't think we can come up with an exact answer, but there are some things that contribute to it. First of all, the respondents were primarily the managers of these organizations, which to me says organizations who have very positive managers need to start thinking about their frontline staff. What does their frontline staff have to say about this? And in fact, we got a response from one of the open-ended questions that was very powerful, which said that, you know, I answered this survey using my own personal opinions. However, I feel that many others in our organization would have answered very differently. Discrimination based on sexual orientation and sexual identity is extremely common among the folks that we serve, and even among our staff. So for those of you here who are working with refugees and have a broader staff or some kind of other broader institution that you might work with, you're here, you're interested in this issue. Think to yourself about what the attitudes are of the other folks that you work with, and how you might begin to engage with them on this issue. So like you see here in this slide, very high responses on deservedness. Same thing on willingness. There's some variation, but you know, pretty much we're talking, when you see the number 3 bar on the left of the screen, that's like willing, very willing, you know, definitely willing is number 4. So sure, I'm willing. So these are fairly high levels of response on this. But like I said, it caused us to think through who the respondents are and who the people in the organization responded, who is not responding to this message and what their attitudes were. One of the striking conclusions that we found from the survey had to do with the contact that people have with LGBTI individuals in their own lives. So we're not talking about the refugees that they might serve, but just who has a sister, who has a brother, who has an uncle, who has a friend, who has a coworker, who's LGBTI. And we wanted to measure that as a starting point to analyze how that might impact people's attitudes toward sexual minorities that they served in their offices. So we see that actually there's a fairly high proportion of people who did have some kind of contact with the LGBTI people in their lives. Again, we're talking about managers of these organizations, so you can think of slightly different demographics there, you might think of slightly different education levels and so on. It might be an international staff person as opposed to a local staff person. There's all sorts of factors there, but that was very high. What we saw was that when we cross-hatched, or whatever the academic term is for looking at 2 different factors, when we compared the contact with LGBTI individuals and the willingness to serve, that's where it was really striking to see that you look at the blue bar, if you have no contact, that's how willing you are to provide services to a gay man. But if you know somebody, it goes way up. And if you have a close friend or family member, ooh, it's through the roof. So you see, I mean, we wanted to look at the different categories. So at the bottom, gay man, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and then intersex. So, you know, interestingly, transgender folks are getting better willingness numbers than others, but that's a whole, you know, you have to get into the weeds to figure out why that is. But this was sort of the most powerful bit of information that we pulled out of the survey because it informs the work that we all have to do to sensitize our environments, our academic environments, our refugee assistance environments, or wherever it is that we're doing our work. In the sense that it points to the fact that if you are concerned about the attitudes that other folks in your environment have toward LGBTI refugees or LGBTI individuals themselves, it behooves us to somehow facilitate bringing somebody in who can talk about their lived experience as a gay man, lesbian, trans person, and to share that, and to begin to make the contact so that that barrier can begin to come down, and so that in this context that LGBTI refugees can be treated with equality and the sensitivity that other refugees are treated with in environments. Another thing we were interested in was whether people's spiritual beliefs had any impact on their willingness to serve LGBTI refugees. Nope, didn't really have an impact at all. People who brought faith to work with them and people who were totally secular had the same levels of willingness to serve LGBTI refugees. So to me that was an indication that, you know, activists and advocates should not close off certain avenues in terms of looking for support. You know, you're sort of on the progressive left and your whole world is secular. Don't think that you can't find a partner in faith-based communities. The other sort of interesting point that I thought I'd throw in there was we were looking at institutional relationships. Did an NGO have a relationship with international organizations? And we did notice that those organizations that were maybe an implementing partner or had some connection to the UN Refugee Agency were slightly more likely to receive clients or to work with clients who brought claims based on gender identity. You'll see that on the left side. So those with no connection to UNHCR were down at 22%, and those with a connection were up at almost 40%. And sexual orientation as well was a little bit higher. I don't know exactly what to do with that information, but it's kind of interesting. It's something that we bring into the mix. So that's basically it in terms of the highlight of the survey itself. I touched on some of the recommendations that we're coming to when we're thinking through this information. I think that more than anything, we're going to find out a lot more in terms of where to go with specific organizations when we hear anecdotally from the 100 or so organizations that we're going to interview. Because that's the place we're going to find out from people specifically what's going to work in their organizations to try to break down this barrier and to try to create an environment where sexual minorities who are fleeing from persecution feel that they can come forward, that they can identify early enough in the process so that their social needs, medical needs, and other needs can be met, and so that if necessary, they can be resettled outside of those countries to welcoming environments, whether they're in Canada, US, Australia, or parts of Europe. So that's the scoop. Thank you very much.